Thank you. Thank you. Yep, so my name's Lee Scott. I'm a songwriter, so music maker. So I approach elastic spaces from, I guess, an audio perspective. So predominantly my songwriting leads my storytelling. And then to that I attach animation, I attach film, I attach programming, web development and so forth to try and enhance the stories I tell through sound. So the purpose of this talk is really to align a new opera I've created for mobile media called Fragments with the provocation of elastic space. So I'll very briefly discuss the features that might constitute an opera for mobile media before discussing how Fragments deploys binaural sound to disrupt the listener's experience of time as they negotiate the work. So an opera for mobile media is a subgenre of what could be described as digital opera. And a digital opera suggests a new operatic form that is intrinsically digital from conception to finished outcome. Qualified works, they reconfigure, they reimagine the typical features of opera and deploy concepts such as digital storytelling and interactive music to enhance the splendour and evocative nature of the form. So a digital opera might be presented via the web. For example, this is a screenshot from an online opera called The Imaginary Voyage, which is based on Alfred Jarry's text that exploits the opinions of Dr. Faustroll Pataphysician. Google that. The narrative features Faustroll, a lawyer, and a dog-faced baboon called Bostonnage as they sail the Squitty Sea, encountering a number of strange and unique islands along the way. And this particular island, it's just a still, of course, but this one's called the Isle of Cac. But digital opera might be presented as installation. So this is another work I put together with a couple of with Andrew Hugel and Sunken Martin Rees, a digital media artist. So this is an opera ballet. It's called Secret Garden, where users use iPads to essentially peer into virtual peepholes, which collectively tell the story of the fall. So Adam and Eve. But digital opera comes in many flavours, and actually surprisingly there are quite a lot of them. So from machine operas such as Libertaria, to live stage works with entirely computer-generated performers, to animated social media-inspired operas that encourage interaction with and even the intervention of the core components of opera, such as text, sound and image. So there's nevertheless a lack of opera for mobile media, with the two more weird images, the two more visible examples advanced by a Finnish theatre director called Jaakko Nuusinen. So Nuusinen work encourages us to consider what opportunities mobile media might offer to the opera form. So think about this, is that firstly it's location aware. So this leads to the idea of citywide operas, the incorporation of journey and discovery into the tone of the work. But a mobile is also a rather individual experience, although we're connected to many people through it. The actual act of using a mobile phone is pretty individual. So this arises to the idea of a personal opera that can be steered and directed by the user. But what about the music? What about how we experience music on the move? Well, mobile media prompts us to reimagine how we encounter music and to possibly consider the creative possibilities of music written specifically for headphones. So Fragments essentially looks at these features of mobile media and tries to really use them to create a piece of artwork, which is in this case opera. So Fragments then, it's a personal operatic experience. It's set and delivered in the city of Bath. So it tells the story of an unnamed male protagonist who wakes early in the morning under the shadow of the Bonas obelisk in Queen Square, it's right centre of the city. So dazed and confused, the protagonist reaches for his iPhone to find several frantic text messages and missed calls of his partner called Lucy. So he remembers relaxing with her in the city several hours earlier, but can't remember any subsequent events. So Lucy's nowhere to be seen, she cannot be contacted, and she may well still be in distress. So the player, and it's kind of a game, this opera, I guess, so player, user, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to go for player, enters the opera at this point and is hurriedly encouraged to take responsibility for the protagonist's well-being. So with only an on-screen map marked with 2 waypoints for guidance, the player proceeds to lead the unnamed character, helpless figure, across the city in order to search for lost memories. It's a happy tale. So along the way, the player must choose which locations to visit next and guide by the app, where each new location reveals just a little bit more information about what happened that previous evening. The player, however, they must make very rational interpretations of what they have learnt, as ill-judged decisions on what to believe or where to go next might lead to a very unfavourable conclusion of the drama. So Fragments then, it's told through binaural soundscapes, video and music in the singer-songwriter tradition. But the key mechanism I use to tell the story here is audio and visual flashback. So the protagonist, and I guess by extension the player, is at times transported back to the events of the previous evening. So visual flashback events are presented via video, as the player enters an area of Bath that has significance to the story. But there are other more subtle sort of use of sound that present flashback as well. And I'll come back to the sound aspects in just a second. So the function of video flashbacks, to begin with, is to help the player piece together the events of the previous evening. So essentially, it's about depicting the protagonist's memory, what they remember from the night before. So these videos, though, they're often turbulent, they're often presented in the incorrect order, so scenes are mixed up, and they often also present lots of different versions of the same events. You have to really, the player has to figure out what's true, what isn't true, and make a judgment there. So the songs themselves, they're just the voice of the protagonist. So really it provides a character-driven, emotive response to the events that are unfolding around him. So this example here is a piece of video. This is one of the scenes, the flashback scenes in the opera. There's about 12 in total. And this is triggered when the player visits a church, St. John's Church, which is on the South Parade. So essentially what happens is, on approach, the app will alert the player that a flashback is imminent by vibrating the phone. So they'll pick it up. And before suggesting, they also then go to a particular place, so a particular view and orientation, so forth. Why? To achieve a feeling that the protagonist's memory is triggered by his surroundings, it's important to try and position the player in such a way that the objects and perspectives in front of him or her also appear in the video flashbacks. So you'll see what I mean just saying. Anthony, can you grab the lights for me? You can grab them. Thank you. It's quite a dark image. So along the way, the player must choose which locations to visit next and guide by the app, where each new location reveals just a little bit more information about what happened that previous evening. The player, however, must make very rational interpretations of what they have learnt, as ill-judged decisions on what to believe or where to go next might lead to a very unfavourable conclusion of the drama. So Fragments then, it's told through binaural soundscapes, video and music in the singer-songwriter tradition. But the key mechanism I use to tell the story here is audio and visual flashback. So the protagonist, and I guess by extension the player, is at times transported back to the events of the previous evening. So visual flashback events are presented via video, as the player enters an area of Bath that has significance to the story. But there are other sort of use of sound that present flashback as well. And I'll come back to the sound aspects in just a second. So the function of video flashbacks, to begin with, is to help the player piece together the events of the previous evening. So essentially, it's about depicting the protagonist's memory, what they remember from the night before. So these videos, though, they're often turbulent, they're often presented in the incorrect order, so scenes are mixed up, and they often also present lots of different versions of the same events. You have to really, the player has to figure out what's true, what isn't true, and make a judgment there. So the songs themselves, they're just the voice of the protagonist. So really it provides a character-driven, emotive response to the events that are unfolding around him. So this example here is a piece of video. This is one of the scenes, the flashback scenes in the opera. There's about 12 in total. And this is triggered when the player visits a church, St. John's Church, which is on the South Parade. So essentially what happens is, on approach, the app will alert the player that a flashback is imminent by vibrating the phone. So they'll pick it up. And before suggesting, they also then go to a particular place, so a particular view and orientation, so forth. Why? To achieve a feeling that the protagonist's memory is triggered by his surroundings, it's important to try and position the player in such a way that the objects and perspectives in front of him or her also appear in the video flashbacks. So you'll see what I mean just saying. Anthony, can you grab the lights for me? You can grab them. Thank you. It's quite a dark image. It's a bit of rough cut, so bear with me on the sound. One of the darker scenes. So back to binaural soundscapes then. So a key device used in fragments to disrupt the player's perception of time is the binaural sound or 3D sound. Now, binaural sound is used temporarily. It's unexpected, and it presents the sound of the city at night to players roaming the streets during the day. So the intended result is a feeling of disorientation as the player encounters sound events that are related to yet disconnected from what they see around them, essentially. So, binaural sound then, what is it? It's a form of headphone-targeted audio that aims to reproduce accurately the acoustic properties of the space in which it was recorded, therefore situating the listener at the site of audio capture. I don't want to get too technical, but I guess these things are quite important. Basically, what binaural sound systems do is they simulate the way that ears capture sound. So if, for instance, a sound source is located front and to the right, the sound will take a little longer to reach the left ear. So this is called interaural time difference. But we have heads and mass and that kind of thing between our ears. So we find that there's also a difference in volume between the ears as well, and frequency, and this is called interaural level difference. So our ears interpret these phenomena to locate sound sources accurately, and this is why we tend to struggle to tell where sound's originating from when we've got colds, because our ears are blocked up and we struggle in that way. So this is the binaural microphone I use to capture 3D sounds. This is a 3DO free space. And what these binaural microphones do is they preserve the interaural and interlevel differences experienced by our ears. So in other words, they simulate the human and ear and the head. So you'll notice a couple of important features about this particular microphone. The first is that you can't quite see it, but the microphone capsules themselves are embedded within silicon molds of real ears. The other thing is that the mass between the ears is preserved. It's preserved in a particular way here. It doesn't look like a human head, but you can get binaural microphones that look like human heads. This is a pretty good simulation, and it costs £5,000 less than the one that looks like a human head. So I'm going to go with this. Now, the interesting thing, for me anyway, about binaural sound recordings is that they're often really unconvincing. Why is this? Usually because they're experienced in away from the site in which they're originally recorded. So, for instance, if you listen to a binaural sound recording of a concert hall in a cupboard, that's not going to really work as such, because the brain rejects the illusion. It can tell that what you hear and what you see are disconnected. They don't correlate. However, I found that when you replay binaural recordings in the same place in which they were captured, the results are ridiculously compelling, quite eerie in fact. So it's a good friend of mine, Mr. Jans Lee. We recorded binaural audio for hours and hours and hours around Bath. And when we recorded the sound of the bells of the church that you just saw, and then sat down on the bench, listened to them back, the results were staggering. They were ghostly. In fact, we had to keep taking the headphones on and off because we couldn't tell what was in the recording and what was actually live in front of us. It was incredible. I've never experienced binaural sound like that. So how do I use binaural sound? I use it to superimpose the past on the present in fragments. So the city becomes an elastic space, in a sense, as the player is transported back and forth through time via what they hear. Now, this is done in two ways. It's done through major audio flashback events and more coincidental minor events. Now, the major ones, these are set pieces, in fact. These present at several points during the opera. And one is on the approach to the nightclub Commedia. Who lives in Bath, by the way? Okay, well, these guys will know what Commedia is, I can tell you that right now. Well, basically what happens is, when approaching the east side of the city, the player first hears this dull thud of club music in the distance. They continue towards Commedia, eventually entering a sound world that is vibrant with the bustle of a busy Saturday evening. The kineticism of the all environment contradicts the lazier daytime scene that is presented visually in front of the player, which creates a sense of confusion and temporal dislocation. Now, these minor sound events are more transient, and they serve to temporarily disrupt the player's understanding of the city. So an example of this might be a walk down a quiet alleyway. Now, the sound of a quiet alleyway in the daytime and nighttime isn't particularly different. It's quite similar, so not a lot going on. But with binaural sound, you could have a bicycle bell ringing going past you, or people talking in close proximity when they're not really there. And this actually puts the player on edge. Why do I want to do that? Well, because I'm trying to forge this relationship between the protagonist and the player, so the player understands the mental state of the protagonist. So it's about this relationship. So that's quite effective in that sense. So me and Jans, we recorded all the Flatbush locations, and we recorded them on a busy Saturday evening, which is the time when the flashback world set, of course. Made for some very interesting moments when semi-intoxicated people mistook the camera for the microphone for a video camera. Well, you can imagine. Now, as player walking paces vary, you have to be quite clever about how you organise the binaural sound. You can't just hit play at one location and allow it just to run, and then when you get to the location, magically, it's all synced up. I'm afraid it doesn't quite work like that. So what we did was we organised the binaural tracks into blocks that could be triggered when needed during the opera. So the last thing I'm going to show is just an example, really, of how these blocks are organised. And this is on the walk from the Turf Maze, which is one of the flashback locations, down to either Commedia or to St John's Church. So here, whilst at the Turf Maze, the player will choose which location they want to visit next, whether Commedia or St John's. And at this point, the protagonist's song will begin playback. So you get song, 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 with the intention that it'll end around at that boundary there marked song ends. Once the player reaches region 1, the first binaural track will commence. And that's a track of the River Avon in the right-hand side of the ear there. It'll be mixed into the headphones when the song actually ends. Now, that particular binaural track will continue until the player gets to region 2, where another binaural track will start. So that binaural track will either be the route describing region 2 to St John's or region 2 to Commedia, depending on the player's choice. The choice that the player selected was at the Turf Maze. It's complicated. It takes a lot of organisation and one hell of a spreadsheet, I can tell you that. Right, so there's absolutely loads to talk about when it comes to using time dilation and also messing around with space using binaural audio and video in fragments. For example, we compress time, we expand it, loads of stuff during here to try and get that feeling of disorientation across to the player. But we also play around with panning. So, for instance, with the binaural sound, when you have the river on the right, if you flip it to the left and walk along the river, that's really disconcerting when you can hear the sort of polar opposite of what you think you should. So all that stuff contributes to the general tone of the opera. But I don't have time to tell you about all that stuff right now, so I'm just going to leave it there and say thank you for listening.